My name is Emily Ledingham. I've been working for Knowles for about 10 years, thanks. And I've worked as a field instructor, I've worked as a program supervisor at a few different locations, and over the last couple of years I've also had different roles, where one of which has been contributing to some projects coming out of the education department. I almost said entertainment department. And today what we're going to talk about is some reflections on a positive learning environment. And I may ask for some technical support. Is there some way to get this on there? Thanks. Cool. So I have been responsible for creating a lot of course cultures in my time as a course leader, and I've had mixed success. I have had, probably just like anyone here, times where things have gone more or less how I wanted them, and I've also had some very significant failures along the way. And I have seen students expand and thrive and become the best versions of themselves in our course environments. And I've also seen students shut down or act out or shrink or withdraw into themselves or fail to do their best work on courses that I've been a part of. I think one of the reasons I'm interested in this topic and talking about a positive learning environment is that I'm drawn to the complexity and the different component parts of the challenge. I think it has both technical and adaptive elements, and I think that makes it unique. So there are technical fixes to the problems presented by a positive learning environment. On one level, we have tons of concrete tools at our disposal. So things that we can do to help manage our course container. And we're going to hear later from instructors who are going to offer some really explicit step-by-step actions that you can take to make your courses better and support a PLE. And that's awesome. It's awesome for a lot of reasons. One is that focusing on the technical and the observable can help us learn. They can help us grow from our experiences and also from each other. It gives us something to talk about. It's helpful to bring language and intention to some of the things that we probably do reflexively in the field. And we all benefit from talking about a PLE in concrete terms, because that's part of what it means to adopt a growth mindset. So anyone can do this. Anyone can be trained in this. We can all do this better. Okay, and then on this other level, it requires heart engagement. And so there are messy, intangible, human elements that can be really hard to quantify and talk about. And as of right now, there is no flowchart. There is no set of rules that you can apply that will allow you to predictably yield the same results. Did I get an amen? Yeah. And so throughout our conversation, I hope that we can hold both of those things at once. So on one level, the desire to make these things as concrete and observable as possible, and then also the knowledge that we won't be able to do that all the time, and that this is a pretty individual process, that it's highly adaptive. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the what and the why. We're talk about what my goals are, what a PLE is, how it relates to an inclusive course culture, and also to expedition behavior. Why we're talking about this today, and then also what is the draw to a PLE. Then we're going to talk about a systems approach. What can systems thinking uncover for us as we try and examine our positive learning environments? We're going to talk about the PLE talk itself. And then we're also going to talk about some signs that your group may be doing well, or signs that there's room for improvement. So my goals in this, and these are more amorphous hopes than learning objectives. Don't look at me, Jamie O'Donnell. One is just to contribute to a wider conversation about this, how we consistently create positive learning environments on our courses. Another is to offer an alternative perspective to the idea that a PLE is a PLE talk, or that the bulk of the lifting happens during the PLE talk. And then the third is that you leave this plenary and also this faculty summit just a little bit more excited, a little bit better tooled, a little bit more curious about how it is that you're going to cultivate a PLE on your next course. Easy, right? Okay, so I'm going to do some talking, and we're also going to get to watch some video compilations of instructors and students wrestling with different elements of a positive learning environment. These are videos that were produced mostly by Allison Hudson with support from Liz Toohey and me, and these are going to be part of summer briefings, positive learning environment summer briefings across the school. They're not meant to offer definitive answers to the questions posed around a positive learning environment. They're just meant to pick up on themes and spark curiosity and engagement. So please have that in your minds as we're watching. We're going to get to that in a second. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what a PLE is. Positive learning environments create opportunities for positive, transformative experiences on our field courses. So these are a bunch of component parts that make up a PLE. They include things like an inclusive course culture, opportunities to practice and reflect and fail, high expectations, and appropriate challenges. So it's related to an inclusive course culture, but it's not the same thing. An inclusive course culture is a necessary part. An inclusive course culture, these are cultures that develop norms that help us engage in difference to create high-functioning teams and also allow for authentic individuality. So that is an inclusive course culture. So an inclusive course culture is one of the several things that make up a PLE, and then a PLE and inclusive course culture are things that come together to help us have expedition behavior. Does that make sense? Great. We're going to launch into our first video. And you're going to hear students and instructors try to express the value of a positive learning environment for them.
I want them to tell the difference between the impact they have on their group when they blurt out a sexist or racist remark, and when they are walking around camp barefoot and they stub their toe and they swear.
I basically want to travel with a group where I feel comfortable and confident making mistakes, big and small, and basically not being made fun of for those mistakes.
I think one pitfall though is thinking about positive culture as its own distinct thing, when in fact it's related to everything else on the course.
If we only think of leadership on those courses as our 4-7-1 model, we're really missing out.
If there's certain students that aren't really good at the basic camping skills, they can't really help out, they can't really have good expedition behavior that feeds tensions, can't help with their own culture. If those students that can't communicate well about conflict, yeah, it's all related.
Ideally, a positive course culture is paying attention to allowing people to be seen as who they are. They can bring their wonderfulness and their messiness as a person, and we're still going to care for them.
What helps me to foster positive community is that I respect everyone's challenge. There's some people that struggle on being on time, there's people that struggle to talk in public. I think respecting everyone's challenge and approach in a way that it's okay to have that challenge. And we celebrate together with accomplishment. It's super nice. And I think it creates a comfort zone for our students.
There's a lack of vote. You get to choose what your course culture is.
I just went into my own course thinking I was just going to be a regular trip. I was just going to learn how to kayak with regular people, and it turned out to be such an amazing lifetime experience for me. So by the end of that, I felt different. I felt like I actually belonged there. I was part of something bigger.
I think that's the biggest thing that they helped facilitate was to be open-minded and be open to the experience.
At the end of the day, you're part of something bigger, and you're going to contribute something to the world, and it's going to be great.
Who's ready to move to California and get a job at LPS Richmond? I am. Great, so we just heard from a lot of people about the reasons why cultivating a PLE is really important, and before we get there, or before we talk about that, I'm going to offer a couple reasons why I think it's important to talk about here right now. One is, who went to the forum on the faculty work group last night? Training work group? Did that happen? Yeah, okay. So when instructors were polled to figure out the areas where we feel under-resourced as field staff, those things ranked pretty high. So the ability to foster a positive course culture and then also to respond to student behavior. So that's one reason. And another reason is that we are inconsistent at this. There is a wide range of competencies in our instructor pool in terms of our ability to reliably and confidently foster a positive learning environment. So if we assume that the people in this room are representative of the wider faculty, there will be people among us who can confidently rattle off 5 to 10 formation phase activities that you can do to break down difference and assumptions of similarity within your course, and you do it every single time. And then within this room, there are also people who don't know what that is, and also maybe are skeptical about the idea that instructors can even positively impact a course culture. And I'm not making you raise your hands, because I don't want to bully the showboaters. So those are just two reasons. We just heard from a whole bunch of instructors and students, and I'm going to add my voice to the chorus. Just 6 reasons that are, to me, some of the most resonant for why it's worthwhile to put a whole bunch of energy into cultivating a PLE. Okay, number 1, because it's related to everything else. So we understand that a PLE is integrated and connected and embedded in everything that we do in the field. technical skill acquisition, physical goal acquisition. When we think about risk management, all of these seemingly unrelated goals are reliant upon our ability to function really well as a team and communicate. They hinge on having a supportive learning environment where people are free to experiment, to make mistakes, to be vulnerable, to ask authentic questions. Number 2, because we can. This is a really unique and powerful opportunity. Maybe never again will our students have the opportunity to go into the field for 7 days or 30 days or 90 days and craft an intentional community without intrusion from the outside. That is a crazy thing when you think about it. And if we didn't put a whole bunch of intention and care into how that community grows and manifests, that would be a real missed opportunity. Because science, there is a lot of evidence-based research that tells us that what happens between group members is as important as just about any other educational factor, and that includes things like classroom design and teaching style. And so we want to pay a lot of attention to the way that our community is interacting with each other. Because of isolation, positive learning environments matter in all classrooms, but they particularly matter in the field. And our instructors and our students are totally cut off from friends and family and support structures and routines and things that help us feel whole and things that bolster our identities. And so in the absence of that, you know, our course containers have the capacity to foster a lot of intimacy and connection, and they also have the capacity to leave us feeling really lonely and isolated. And so you can imagine the dissonance that a student or instructor might feel when they are unseen, undervalued, disconnected from the whole. Number 5, because oppression. This is a little plug for Sydney and Asher's talk this afternoon. Everyone needs a PLE, and some people benefit more than others. Students and instructors whose identities are more likely to have them experience otherness, people whose stories are passed over by dominant narratives, people whose lives are shaped by sexism and racism and transphobia and so on. These are the people who I think stand to benefit the most from a positive learning environment. In the absence of an environment where we are breaking down difference and we are valuing the diversity on a team, you will find that people of color, women, poor people, queer people, non-Americans, non-English speakers will be the people who have to contort and bend to fit into a NOLS course. And that is a huge burden, it's a distraction, it's exhausting, and at the very least it's inauthentic. If we know that racism and sexism and Islamophobia and transphobia, if we know that they exist within our wider culture, which they do, unless we are being very proactive, what reason would we have to believe that they wouldn't play out on a NOLS course? So I would argue that members of non-dominant groups have the most to stand, the most to gain, and the most to lose when we're thinking about responsibly cultivating a PLE. The last one, we have learning goals, and I can't remember exactly what they are. Does anyone know? One is related to functioning on teams, and the other one is, I think, related to effective communication. But we have learning goals, and so we want our students to show up, and we want them to have a positive transformational experience. We want to give them every opportunity to succeed. And then we want them to go home and positively influence their peer groups, their families, their workplaces. Ideally, students leave a NOLS course with an expanded idea of what is possible in terms of a team and in terms of group function. And they are able to reproduce its best elements on the teams that they find themselves in next. Okay, so those are my 6. I share those with you not because I think they're the right answer. or that those should be your answers, but I think there are advantages to having some sort of answer. If you put thought into the reasons why it's important for you to cultivate a PLE on your next course, it's going to be easier to engage with students who are not entirely bought in and to learn from co-instructors. We are going to shift gears a little bit and talk about a systems approach. Who can give us a working definition for systems thinking? Really? I've got all day. Oh yeah, yeah.
The concept that patterns of behavior are influenced by larger structural forces that bring them about.
Okay, the concept that patterns of behavior are influenced by larger structural forces that bring them about. Okay, great. Hold on to that, have that in the back of your minds. We're gonna watch a video of instructors talking about what they perceive to be entry points into this larger system.
Contribute to that positive course culture. You have to buy in. You have to buy in to be part of that process. It's something that, as an instructor, you have to drive and own and monitor and facilitate. And you have even more obligation to be part of that positive course culture and part of its success than perhaps students do, because you have a different toolbox. You're able to read it differently.
Being kind, in my mind, is of the utmost importance.
I like the mantra, finding ways to say yes.
I think it's really important to get on the same page as the team, especially about responses to student behavior. Go look in your food bags for what you deem as the best snack food that you possibly can imagine that's in those bags. Bring that with you on day one and share that with your hiking group.
Giving responsibility to students who are pushing boundaries can be a positive way to empower them.
When you start to have behavioral problems, challenges, I can always refer that to this and bring somebody aside and say, hey, what we're doing out here requires basic human decency at all times.
Finding those students who I think I'm going to need to redirect and coach quite a bit with regards to the course culture, and trying to build a rapport with those students as fast as I can.
That action of sharing what you think is some of your best trail food just sets a tone of, what's mine is yours. I like this stuff a lot, and I'm here to share it with you.
Usually building rapport looks like hanging out with them during rations or mixing it up during a bus ride instead of just sitting up front. I sit with some students and get to know a little bit about them.
When I have steady, even demeanor, this allows for more predictability for my groups or my son. And I think with that predictability, it allows the groups or my son to just kind of relax and be themselves.
There's a lot of potential to derail course culture when students hear one thing from instructor A and a different thing from instructor B. I think it leaves a lot of gray area for poor student behavior in between those two different perspectives. And I think it makes students confused as to what we do and do not accept within our course container.
Some of the things I do in the field consistently to try to help foster positive course culture are share my attention between students really evenly so that each person feels cared about, because I do care about them all equally.
how they're doing. I'm not looking for good or bad. I'm genuinely curious and I actually care.
And I don't think we need to be playing games and just be happy and be joking around all the time for it to be a positive force. I think it's very cool when people are really aware of themselves and their actions and what they're doing. And are able to realize that, hey, I will not get along with everybody. There is not every day I don't feel the same way. Every day I don't have to be cheerful. Every day I don't need to go out there and try and meet.
We also need positive learning environments as instructors. I think in demonstrating that vulnerability, we are serving as a role model for students that it is okay to talk about things that are not going well, and that ultimately, hopefully, that improves the course culture for each person. And by demonstrating humility in the things that we are doing that are detracting from that course culture, we are hopefully encouraging the same thing from other people.
So when I see that awareness coming to students, I think that's very good and that's successful.
Understanding that being vulnerable feels different to different people, and how people are in terms of the level of comfort doing that, and being aware of that, like someone actually taking a risk to be vulnerable, and it's harmful to read that people also feel unsafe. Oftentimes I share with the students, you do a mistake, you learn from it, and you move forward. Now, as you can see a group, right? As a whole group, we made a mistake, we reflected, we learned about it, and we have to move forward. So how committed has to keeping that cycle for me?
I like to listen to the information that I'm getting from someone, so from a student, for instance, and we talk about far more on the report end of things as opposed to the report end of things, the other end of the spectrum. I then match that and try and think about my experience and do I have something similar that I can share, or is there something familiar or relatable that I can share that would offer that type of information or that type of connecting at the feeling level back to them. If the student doesn't have those connections with instructors, they're just not able to bring their best selves to the table. They're unable to bring their best selves and contribute to course culture and contribute to the group in that way.
The turning point for most of our students is they say when they have made their first friend, when they have connected with an instructor, and when they feel like they can talk about where they're from, who's in Richmond, and speak about it with pride and not feeling insecure.
With that, I have a stereotype that rich people is here, that people is that black women's cars, they're people marries, and then besides all those circumstances that set us apart, we also made us put together and made us connect, and allowing that the negative mindset in the work.
One of the biggest things I struggled with initially was just my pride. Like, I didn't want to admit to those things that I didn't know because I didn't want to be looked at as incompetent or anything like that. Because you come from an environment where confidence is never a good thing. And so, they did a really good job of, expressing to me that I needed to be as more open-minded as I could be. And that really helped facilitate what I needed to do.
Well, I made my voice a little bit better because of the graduation ceremony. And there was one of my courses I didn't really well on, but that the day of graduation, he got my diploma, so he had to say something nice about me. And I can tell that it was genuine, so it came from the heart, and I really appreciate that.
After the graduation, I didn't feel that I knew my family anymore because I couldn't those bonds. I played with them, I talked with them, I even went to their bathroom and
College people in a different backgrounds, they're gonna have some parents who probably pay for all their college courses and everything. While I'm gonna be on scholarship, and I feel like based on my health scores, I'm not gonna be
Okay, so we're returning to a systems approach. Systems thinking is a method of seeing wholes. It is a school of thought that recognizes the interconnectedness between parts and that emphasizes the examination of relationships. So relationships, patterns, and interactions within the individual parts within a system. It challenges a traditional linear understanding of cause and effect. So a linear approach to the drug and alcohol policy would say that once we share the drug and alcohol policy with our students, maybe in course paperwork, maybe in a course orientation, we can assume that they will not, on their bus trip back from the canyons, go to the liquor store in Meeker, Colorado, and drink underage. And if you want to know how the linear approach works, we can ask Knowles Rocky Mountain. A nonlinear approach suggests that difficulties in solving problems often stem from the fact that these problems don't exist in isolation, but in relation to each other. And so systems thinking can help us understand that a problem that seems isolated is deeply interconnected. So in the case of our friends in Meeker, Colorado, there are a lot of questions that we could ask about opportunities to engage on the course, opportunities for student ownership, relationships between group members, relationships between students and instructors, and group norms, group routines, and so on. Okay, so what does this have to do with the PLE? Well, a linear Newtonian model or mindset would lead us to believe that if we facilitated a super awesome PLE talk, that would sustain us for the rest of the course. It might lead us to understand that this is a box that can be checked, that this is sort of a one and done activity. It might lead us to believe that this is a discrete entity that exists in isolation. And it might lead us to choose between fostering a PLE and other elements of the course, so prioritizing peak ascents or natural history. But a systems approach disrupts all that. We see the PLE as integrative, adaptive, and involved, connected to everything that we do on a course. A systems approach can lead us to expect that there are thousands of ways that we can positively influence the course, trying to influence the environment that we're trying to build, and that the PLE needs constant maintenance and attention. Finding these entry points also requires a lot of persistence and creativity, and I think we saw a little bit of that in some of our instructor responses. A systems approach would lead us to expect that we can facilitate a really engaging PLE conversation, so one that helps establish a sense of belonging, one that breaks down assumptions of similarity and difference, one that helps form really strong and positive peer-to-peer relationships, and we are still only a fraction of the way there. Within this system, we occasionally uncover leverage points, and so those are small changes that can yield really big returns. They are entry points that allow us to interrupt patterns, and those are some of the things that these field staff were pointing to in this last video. We are going to move on from systems thinking, but first I want to make a plug for the Inclusive Course Culture document, which is a systems thinking document. It's a systems thinking artifact. In our quest to identify more systems factors that are influencing our learning environments, this document, in addition to being required paperwork, has a ton of ideas for how we influence the system. And they're written in abstraction, and so I think it's our job as program staff and as instructors to try and bring them to life, make them really concrete. Just out of curiosity, who thinks that they could summarize the contents of the Inclusive Course Culture document? I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'm curious. This is just a poll. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good to know.
Where does that document live?
It's a good question. It lives in all course folders, in all course paperwork folders, as well as on Rendezvous.
On Rendezvous?
Yep. Thanks, Drew. Okay, so the PLE is not equal the PLE talk. And having said that, we're going to do our best to lay a really strong foundation in the course orientation and PLE talk. Some key themes that are going to emerge in the video that we're about to watch. One is that timing really matters, and we know that early influence on the course is going to yield bigger returns. Two is that the PLE talk should make space for a student contribution and expression, certainly, and it also needs to be driven by instructors. We need to make really clear what are our non-negotiables and what are the things that we're willing our students to create for themselves and own themselves. This talk should be seen as part of a progression, so this is not a box that we check. It's something that's going to be continuously revisited. And we can prime the pump. We can promote a higher level of engagement and a more interesting, authentic conversation if we build up to it. And so that's asking students to think about questions ahead of time. That's role modeling vulnerability in your own answers. That's facilitating really actively. And the last thing is that we should try really hard to create a sense of belonging as soon as possible, as early as the course orientation. The PLE will build on that.
I think something tricky about the PLE conversation is that it's happening at a point in the course where everything we're talking about is fluid theoretical. There seems to be a lot of confusion surrounding what exactly it means. There's a lot of words that are thrown out there on the first evening of the course, which is typically when a positive learning environment talk happens. And I found in my experience that retention is very low. While people want to have a positive work environment, they don't necessarily know how to do that. I've made the mistake of not planning this first PLE meeting enough and having the students source the majority of the content. But that's kind of ridiculous. They don't have the context or the relationship with their peers to be able to make course culture expectations in this first meeting.
I think it's okay to say, you know, we're not going into this blindly. We understand what good course culture looks like. We understand how to get there. There's a recipe. We're not just going in blindly. It won't just be dumb luck if things happen to work out well.
We should get their input and their buy-in, but we need to be the driving force of setting expectations early on.
And I think it's important to outline that that is a role and a skill that we have as instructors, that we can help facilitate those things. The student piece then is how they as individuals work within some of those foundational pieces and what the flavors that they bring to it.
The PLE conversation typically does happen early in the course and is inevitably going to be before you know your students really well. So I view this as an opportunity to work on building rapport with the group. I think one way you can do this is showing a genuine interest in what students have to contribute to this conversation.
I'll usually start the PLE conversation by asking students to think about a time they felt excluded, they felt like an outsider. Ask what that felt like, what it would have looked like to an outside observer, and how they responded to that feeling of exclusion.
I think a lot of the students that I work with feel like it's just them, or they're the only ones doing something, or because they are Latino, or because their dominant language is Spanish, or because they're poor, because they're from Richmond, they're the only ones experiencing something. So I would work really hard to normalize that everyone's feeling uncomfortable, or that everyone's a little bit out of their comfort zone by sharing just
hopes and fears that students might have.
Ask them if thinking about a team or like group that they've been part of that felt particularly supportive to them, and to come up with a couple of words about why that felt so supportive, and throw those out to the group. Another important part of the PLE discussion is, I think as an instructor, just opening up and being vulnerable right from the very start.
Usually I like to share first to open up a more vulnerable space for people to share. I'll talk about a time I felt excluded for being gay. That I think makes them more comfortable sharing something personal about themselves.
I like to say something like, I'm part of this group, and just like you'll be times that I slip up or that I make mistakes, and I'm going to need your support and your feedback as I learn and grow within this group and understand how best to support and contribute to a positive learning environment.
Strategy to consider when setting up your PLE and introducing this conversation with students is to think about the privilege that exists within the I-team and being strategic about how you want to use that.
I think when you set yourself up that way, it is an incredibly powerful role model for all of your students to also take on a similar approach.
I usually like to ask them to think about a time they participated in excluding someone else. Why? Well, as a trained, we respond to inclusion incidents not only by supporting the victim, but also by reaching out to the offender. And I think by starting this communication early from this first conversation makes that easier later on. Builds empathy for the offender.
I think the best way to set your students up for success is to outline and have those discussions around a positive learning environment early enough before you have to address potential PLE violations.
Something else I would do that I never really did as a film instructor is just really set the tone around language and using inclusive language and then monitoring students around language, which I was a little bit uncomfortable to do as a film instructor, but now hearing from the students that I work with now how impactful that can be, I would probably want to own that responsibility more so, just making really sure it's a safe place for how we're talking about others, the language that we're using for any type of difference, and then really striving to make people, all people on the course, to feel comfortable.
I also think it's pretty easy for students to feel sabotaged if you find yourself in that position where you are, where it's like, well, you didn't know that there was a line or a preference there, but now that you've crossed it, I'm going to outline what it is and tell you about it in the form of feedback.
You know, the alternative to this is that students see this PLE talk as a set of rules, and I think it's far less impactful if a group views a PLE talk or conversation as like, okay, I'm allowed to do this, I'm not allowed to do this. I think ideally, I feel it's actually something that a group can create and take some pride in.
The next thing that's really important is that we've sort of established the PLE as taking care of the emotional safety of our expedition. And then it's kind of time to start having some fun. And having some good type 1 fun, I think, as a group that includes everyone, I think is really important to creating this positive learning environment.
Speak about that experience with them and really giving a good culture and the formation of the group time.
Great. So we're going to move on to signs of health. I think about some of the courses that went really poorly 6 or 7 years ago, and at the moment, how hard-pressed I was to try and figure out how my actions could have differently influenced the course culture, or how I could have better leveraged the course culture in the service of our mission. And those mistakes are painfully obvious to me now, like really, really sharp into focus. And so I am like humbled and excited to think of the things that will be obvious to me 6 or 7 years from me now. And so I offer that as an example of how I think cultivating sensitivity around signs of health is a lot of work, and it's an evolving process, and we're all mid-process in that work. Again, the Inclusive Course Culture document is an awesome resource because it lays out some of the signs that groups are in jeopardy. Cliques, disengagement, polarity within the group. And again, it's our job as field staff and as program staff to bring those examples to life and to point them out when we see them. So in the course log, in conversations with co-instructors at night, just to ourselves. As much as possible, when we can push each other to make those things observable, they become something we can talk about. We can hold ourselves and groups to really high expectations and always recognize that another stage of performance is possible. The exciting thing for me is to think that as an organization, as our sensitivity grows and it becomes easier to recognize these things and talk about these things, it is an accelerating process. And I like to think of where we'll be 5 years from now, recognizing signs of poor performance or stress within groups. So we're gonna watch another video. As you watch this one, please pay attention to things that are new for you, or at least one thing that's new for you, and also one thing that is missing from signs of either excellent group health or signs of stress within the group.
It is entirely possible that there are some undercurrents of course culture, that there's a negative course culture brewing that Ray is totally unaware of.
One time we got away from us, and we weren't able to influence group culture that much.
The danger, I think, is that there's a positive culture that exists during the day, sort of instructor friendly. Then the instructors go to bed, and an alternative culture there is.
On the second night in the field, every single student stayed up late around the campfire with no instructors present. Whoops. In terms of trying to influence group culture, we were playing catch up with the rest of the course, and we weren't able to get it back.
To avoid that, I like to hang out with students until they go to bed during the first ration. And if that doesn't sound super exciting, I think it means running them super hard during the day, so they want to go to bed early.
Any time that you separate yourself as an instructor unit from the student group behaviours or the student group culture should be closely examined. Or any time that you find that there is a set of rules that you've created that as an instructor team you don't buy into, whether that's around humour or sarcasm or language choice. I think those are all red flags to be closely monitored.
So I've occasionally heard student groups describe the PLE as, oh, the rules that we're not allowed to curse. And I think that obviously that misses the point of the positive learning environment. And I think that we as instructors, if we are spending more time policing things like language and curse words, and not enough time just talking about inclusion and what inclusion is and why it's important to us, then we're pretty likely to alienate some students.
Things that I see in groups that make me think that there's a good group culture and good PLE are students being really curious about one another, engaging with one another, and attempting to build themselves up as a group, like coming to morning meetings saying like, oh, I haven't helped with this person, can we make that happen? And really putting effort into like crafting a larger community rather than building relationships with one or two other people.
It's been sort of a mellow, reasonable day, and students are just passing out, never socializing on their own time. I start to wonder what are different things that I can do to get them excited and curious about each other.
Whether it's new cookbooks at the beginning of a ration, or hiking groups, or even just quickly dividing up into groups for a class. If that is challenging, there's often some undercurrent of favoritism or cliques or conflict that is worth investigating more.
It's probably a red flag if in certain
speak up at all, and then once the group structure shifts, those same students have a lot to contribute.
A way to measure group health is if there's equal participation. And for some that may mean voices, some that may mean tasks, some it may mean questions or creating one-on-one interactions. Doesn't have to all look like voice participation, but some way that there's shared participation.
Another thing that I like to see, it's like, you know, those cook groups, they have routines, cook groups, and then someone's cook in the morning, and then go change your clothes because they're about to be late, but they leave the stove outside, and other cook group comes and put your stove away, and that's a good sign. It's meaning that we don't work towards a group anymore, we work towards a community.
And I think the other thing that we can do while we're in the field is have really good, thorough one-on-one check-ins with our students.
So I like to try to ask that question in every check-in I have with my mentees, and hopefully get a pretty honest depiction of how they feel the course culture is, how they feel the group dynamics are impacting the expedition and them as an individual.
Often in those check-ins, I'm trying to get a sense of how the group is operating when we're not around, when the I team isn't there. And I think sometimes that can help us to continue to kind of mold the positive learning environment the way that we want it.
We had an active meeting where the program had people stepping in, step out, and people holding hands, and we actually have to give we're stepping in towards things that are working well in the group and stepping out towards things that are going against your group. But then we try to hold hands and then the group is stretched. And all your two crews, which is good, which is a good group.
Another thing that sometimes can be quite subtle and quickly derails a good course culture is just unaddressed microaggressions. I think there's no quicker way to erode trust in a group than to let those things slide past. And that in itself obviously condones some of the beliefs and value systems behind those microaggressions.
How friendly a group is to engage in conflict is a pretty useful indicator of how comfortable a group is with one another and how healthy a course culture is.
I feel good about the course culture when I see students giving and receiving unsolicited constructive feedback and actively trying to deal with the conflicts that emerge. I think if that's happening, it means there's a level of trust in the group where those uncomfortable conversations can happen.
Sometimes by taking a step back and removing ourselves from the course culture appropriately, not too much, we can allow some more organic and authentic interactions between students because we aren't there to distract them or to save them from uncomfortable situations.
In order to get a feeling for whether or not the PLE is working, I often try to pay attention to what students are laughing about. So are they laughing about how crazy and ridiculous it was to sit in light position through some huge rainstorm, or are they laughing about how Jill's book got wet during that rainstorm? In other words, are they presenting humor that everyone can participate in, or are they occasionally having a laugh at someone else's expense?
When people seem to sort of genuinely be experiencing some sort of joy on a course, that is a really good sign. And then so obviously like the good PLE, you'll have that experience be accessible to sort of everybody, all the students.
Just like Alan, we're bringing in inclusive environment, like, my question particularly, we have a very wide range of individuals. I was 26, the youngest was 16, and then we also have a couple 17-year-olds. So there was just a varying degree of background
why that this group was one of the most amazing groups you will be part of. That success story is yours.
You're not going to have the best experience